Hey, welcome to the very first edition of Cooking with Carper. Today we've got a really good dish that we're going to be putting together. We're focusing our first lab on tender cuts of meat. We're talking about steaks. We're talking about that beautiful cuts of meat that we really love to have, that taste great, that fall apart in your mouth. But to do that and to get that result, we do have to make sure that we're handling it just right. So for this lab, we're going to be preparing a T-bone steak with sauteed asparagus and a beautiful mushroom sauce to go over the top of that. The first portion of this recipe is going to be making that mushroom sauce. We'll have it all put together off to the side. That way it's ready to go once our steak and our asparagus is done. So let's get started on that. The mise en place for our mushroom sauce is as follows. Starting from the left, working to the right, we have 2 tablespoons of butter, some mushrooms, 4 cloves of garlic. We have a shallot that we're going to be breaking down using only 1 clove of that. We're going to be working with some beef broth and heavy cream, and then seasoning our sauce with pepper, salt, and some dried thyme. Of course, we have our measuring spoons, our knives, our measuring cups, our pan for which we will be cooking our sauce, ready to go before we get started. Now that we've got our ingredients put together, let's go ahead and start building our sauce. I've already gone through and chopped and diced our vegetables, and I've got our butter set up, so now we can kind of move into our cooking process. So we're starting off with our saucepan. The recipe originally calls for a large saute pan, and then cooking our sauce in that. I don't have a really big saute pan here, so I'm going to go with a larger saucepan. It's going to give me the same kind of wide cooking surface for which I can cook, but have enough high size that I can work with the liquids and still get a nice reduction on my sauce. Okay, so we're going to start off with 2 tablespoons of butter in our pan, and we're going to transfer that to our stove. We're going to turn this on to a medium-low temp. That way we can get our butter melted but doesn't get away from us. As that melts, then we're going to add in our mushrooms. We have our minced garlic, and then we also have our diced shallots. Okay? We're going to be sauteing these in our butter together We are going to put those together. And we're going to saute those together for about 12 minutes until the mushroom's nice and soft. Once that's done, then we're going to go ahead and add in our liquids and start reducing that sauce down to a nice consistency. Now that our butter is melted, we've let it go so that it browns a little bit. I like this myself because it gets a nice little nutty flavor into our butter, kind of ramps up the savory flavor of our sauce. First thing we're going to add in it is our garlic. We want this to have just a moment of time by itself in the butter because the fat in the butter is going to release more of the flavors of the garlic into our sauce. Doesn't take long. And now we're going to go ahead and add in our shallot. Give that a quick stir. And then lastly, putting in our mushrooms. Immediately you should be getting a very pleasant aroma of garlic and onion as that butter starts to release those oil-soluble flavors. Now, once you get those mushrooms in and stirred up, you're going to notice that your butter kind of disappears. The mushrooms are kind of soaking those up and getting coated in that butter, but it's going to still be there and it's going to allow it to prevent sticking in our pan. We're going to let this go for about 6 to 8 minutes, allowing those mushrooms to get sauteed nicely. Now as your mushrooms are cooking, you're going to notice that they do start to release their moisture, and it's going to get a little bit more wet in our pan, and that's perfectly normal. That's what we're looking for. Make sure to kind of keep stirring it frequently through your sauteing process. Now we're getting closer to the end of our sauteing portion. Now what you might find is you're starting to get bits that are stuck to the bottom a little bit. That's perfectly fine. Don't worry about that. That's flavor that's developing on the bottom of our pan. Once we get done with this portion, we're ready to move on to our liquid. When we add in our stock, it's going to deglaze the bottom of the pan and pull up all that wonderful flavor. Mushrooms are done now. Now we go ahead and add in our beef stock. It's 1 cup. We'll add that in. That sizzle is what you want to hear. That's the room temperature beef stock coming in contact with the hot pan, and that interaction is what's going to allow us to now scrape up the bottom of the pan, any kind of bits that might have stuck down. So this is that deglazing process I was speaking of. Now what we're going to do is we're going to bring this up to a boil. Once it boils, then we'll drop the temperature back down to medium-low and allow it to simmer for roughly 12 minutes. We're looking to reduce our sauce down by half. We're coming to the end of our simmering process with our beef stock in place. At this point, you should have noticed your liquid is getting smaller and reducing. The smells are wonderful. The mushrooms are softening. There's our timer. Turn that off. Our next stage is to add the cream. We're going to be adding a half cup of heavy whipping cream. And this is what's really going to ramp up the thickness and that luscious mouthfeel that we're looking for in a sauce. So give that a nice stir. Now we're going to simmer this, again, about a medium-low temperature for around 6 to 8 minutes again. At this point, you can go ahead and season your sauce. So we are going to add a half teaspoon of thyme. We're going to add roughly a half teaspoon of salt. Now this is something that you can adjust to your preference. If you like a little less salt, if you like a little more salt, you can go ahead and do as you see fit. My recommendation is to go on the lighter side, add it in, give it a taste. You can always add more, you can never remove. And lastly, we're going to add in a half teaspoon of black pepper. Give that a stir. Let's set a timer. We're going to go with 6 minutes, that shorter time frame, and then we can assess and go from there. Now be real careful as you simmer this, since we now have the cream added in. That dairy product will scorch easily if left unattended. So make sure that you are staying by your sauce, giving it a stir every once in a while, making sure that it is not scorching. After a few minutes of simmering with our seasonings in place, what we can do is grab a spoon and go ahead and taste our sauce. Now we can make some adjustments to seasonings. Really good, very rich, very much a earthy flavor that I think will pair very well with our meat. So now we're going to go ahead and let this cook. Our timer has just gone off. So now what we can do is assess our sauce to see if it needs more time to cook or not. So looking at our sauce and giving it a stir, it's definitely gotten a little thicker. It's super creamy. It looks really good. It smells really good. One of the things that we're going to be looking for is an effect called nappe. It's a French term. What we're looking for is the sauce to coat the back of our spoon. Okay, so if we give it a good stir, we pull it up, you can see the sauce on our spoon. Now if we drag our finger across, it should hold that shape of where our finger was, like it is doing. So we are just getting there. It's not really holding on to it. We'd maybe like to see it just a touch thicker. So we're going to go ahead and add an extra minute or so of simmering. Now the timer has gone off. We've given it an extra couple minutes. And that was just what we needed to ramp up that reduction right to where we want it to be. So now what we're going to do is take this sauce out of the pan, put it in a bowl. We'll save this for later. When we get ready to complete our dish, we can simply heat it up in a saucepan again until it simmer, and then we can put it on, and everything will be perfect. Now that our sauce is made, now we can shift our attention over to the meat. For this particular dish, the main meat that we're going to be utilizing is a T-bone steak. I'll open this up so you can get a look. The T-bone steak is a cut of meat that comes from the spine of the beef. We have a section of the vertebrae here and a bone that runs down through the center of our cut. On both sides of that bone, we have two different well-known cuts of meat. We have a New York strip, and then we have a tenderloin portion. Now, depending on what part of the spine, either closer to the rump or closer to the shoulder or the chuck, you have different or varying degrees of muscle mass on each side. Okay? So this is coming from the spine. It is going to be a tender cut of meat. It's a portion of meat or muscle that is not exercised or developed as much as, say, the shoulder or the leg. So starting out, this is going to be a much more tender, easier to eat cut of meat. So because of that, we want to make sure that we cook it quickly. We stick to dry heat methods. So for this particular dish, we are going to sear the outside, and then we're going to go into the oven and roast for about 10 minutes or so, just to get it to the doneness that we're looking for, which will be medium rare. To start this process, I've got a roasting pan here that I'm just going to use for now. We want to allow our meat to come to room temperature. This is going to help relax the muscles in the meat. That way we get a better cook, and it helps retain some of the tenderness of our steaks. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and transfer this steak to our pan. Get rid of the paper. I also have just the New York strip. So a separate cut of meat from the same area, but it's just been broken down into smaller sections. Okay. So I can show you, we have our T-bone. This is actually closer to a porterhouse size because of the larger tenderloin. But then we have our New York strip, which is just the sirloin side of that meat. Okay, so I'm going to set this here. What we're going to do is we're going to salt and pepper this steaks very well. I'm going to look to get a good amount of seasoning on here. And then we're just going to let this sit for 20-30 minutes. It's come to room temperature and allow that salt to penetrate that meat. Now we're going to go ahead and hit these with some salt and pepper. So I got these right here. We're not doing a ton of things with it here. We're not getting real crazy. Just super simple. Salt and pepper will allow the meat to do the talking in this dish. Okay. So start off with our salt. Sprinkling over the top. Again, I'm not worried about going easy here. We have relatively thick pieces of meat, so we want to make sure that we are seasoning plenty. Okay? So we got the salt on the top, then we're going to come through with pepper. I like a decent amount of pepper. I like a little bit of spice to go with the meat. I think it complements the taste of steak very well. If you're not as much of a fan of pepper, control it however you like it to be. With that, now we're going to go ahead and flip these and then season the other side. Our salt, and then our pepper. And if you wanted to, you could add other herbs and spices at this point. If you wanted to get a nice seasoned mix or rub going, you certainly may. And that's all up to you and your choices. Once we get that seasoned, now what we can do, take a little extra step. We have all of this salt and pepper that's in the pan. So now we can kind of lift it up, kind of get the sides of the meat seasoned as well. I myself tend to eat everything, even the fat cap that's on the meat. So I like to have it well seasoned. Now it's up to you and your preferences, depending on what you like. If you don't want as much fat on the meat, you can trim that off and keep that to the side or discard it. The benefit of having that fat on there is it's going to add tenderness, it's going to add flavor and juiciness to our steaks. So my suggestion would be to keep the fat on. When you go to eat it, you can always remove it, but during the cooking process, it adds a nice element to your dish. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to cover this with some plastic quick and just let it sit at room temperature. While that's sitting for 20 or so minutes, we're going to go ahead and get our asparagus ready. Now we got things set up for our asparagus. I'm going to give you a quick walkthrough of how to put this together. So we have our asparagus here, purchased from the store. We're going to take the rubber bands off. And then there's just a quick processing that we need to do with asparagus. Now, as this grows, you have, the whole thing is edible, but the bottom tends to get real woody as it grows, as it develops. So what we want to do is remove this bottom portion that's not going to be as easily eaten. And to do that, it's real simple. You simply bend it and snap. It will break where it naturally becomes tender. Okay, so this is about the size that we're going to be shooting for. The rest of these can be discarded. Now you can go through and snap each of these by hand in order to get to the size that you want. Otherwise, now that we've got one, most of them are going to be around the same size. So, in terms of speeding this process up, we're going to grab our chef's knife, turn our asparagus, get them all kind of lined up, have our guide, and then we're going to just go through and cut all of those base stems off. Now, we might be losing some good asparagus here, but in terms of time, it doesn't make a big difference. Okay. From here, you can decide what size of asparagus pieces that you want. In terms of this dish, I'm going to cut them down just a little bit smaller, so not quite as long. A little bit easier to eat, so I'm going to cut this down again one more time. Okay. From here, while our steaks are resting and marinating, getting ready for cooking, we're going to go ahead and get these into a quick marinade. I have just a rectangular dish here. What I'm going to do is add in some olive oil. Not really measuring this, I'm kind of winging it. I would say that's probably getting close to 1/3 of a cup or so. And then we'll add some apple cider vinegar. This is going to give you the zing that we're looking for in our marinade. It's going to help penetrate the vegetables and brighten the flavors of our vegetable. Okay, so I'm choosing to use apple cider vinegar. You can use other vinegar. You can use lemon juice or lime juice if you would like. I'm going to do about a tablespoon or so of vinegar. We don't need a lot, just enough to kind of give us a little kick. Plenty of salt. Plenty of pepper. And then for our spices, I'm going to add a little bit of garlic powder. And because of the flavors that we have going on here and in our dish and our steak, we have a lot of earthy, a lot of natural flavors. So what I'm going to do is add a little bit of crushed red pepper to get a little bit of a bite and a little spice to kind of balance out the flavors that are present. Now, this is not something that we're looking for a ton of kick, just a little bit to realize it's there. Now we'll go ahead and mix this up with a fork. And then we'll get our asparagus in here and give it a good toss and let it sit. Now we go ahead and drop our asparagus in. Now with clean hands, I'm going to go ahead and give these a quick toss. Make sure they're all nice and coated. And now we can set this off to the side. Now we're ready to start moving into our cooking process. We have our asparagus ready to go. Our steak has been resting. I have moved my mushroom sauce back into a small saucepan so that we can start getting this onto the stove over low heat. Allow it to start warming up. Now this process is going to happen quickly, so you need to make sure that you are prepared and ready to go. What we're going to start with is our meat. We're going to pull that off to the side. We're going to get our pan heated up, and then we'll start cooking that and searing it off. Once we move that to the oven, then we will start cooking our asparagus. So again, there's going to be some time management here that you really need to be aware of and ready for. Okay? So, for our purposes, I do not have a large enough pan for both cuts of meat, so I'm going to start with the T-bone, and I'll sear that off and get that in the oven, and then I have another pan that I'll start working on that New York strip after that. The searing process, what we're going to be doing is getting our pan nice and hot, dropping our meat in for a few minutes on each side just to develop a really nice crust, and then we're moving into the oven. Okay, so we want to start off with a relatively high heat, so medium high. And we're going to allow our pan to heat dry, so no oil, nothing in it right now as it heats up. What this is going to do is it cause the molecules of the metal to expand, and so it's actually going to give us more of a non-stick effect and keep the meat from sticking to our pan. So we're going to allow that to heat up for a couple minutes. When we do go to use oil, we want to make sure that we're using an vegetable oil or canola oil. We don't actually want to be using olive oil for this instance because it has a much lower smoke point, and for the type of cooking that we're going to be doing, we want something that can hold up to the heat and not start to smoke and smoke out our kitchen. Okay, so we're going to be using vegetable oil for this. Don't need a whole lot, just a couple tablespoons or so, just so it coats the bottom. Okay. When looking at the meat, everything is all set up, ready to go. It looks great. One thing you do have to be careful of when you do have all this fat cap here is that as that cooks, that elastin, that connective tissue is going to shrink, and it can cause the steak to start to curl over. So a really good idea at this point is to score vertically this fat that runs along the edge of our meat. We're looking to cut through that fat just to the meat. We're not looking to really cut the meat itself. This is going to help, again, like I said, make sure that the steak doesn't curl up, and so that we have a good, as it spins around, a good even cook on our meat. I'll get one more slice right there. Okay, so that's ready to go. I'm going to rinse my fingers just real quick. Okay, so our pan is nice and hot. Now we're going to get our vegetable in. Again, like I said, just a couple tablespoons just to coat the bottom of that pan. One of the things you're going to be looking for is that oil to kind of start to spread out, kind of look like water. That lets you know that it's nice and hot. Grab a pair of tongs. Now we're going to bring our meat to the pan. Now as this cooks, one of the things you have to really be careful of is not to mess with it. Allow it to cook, allow it to do what it needs to do. If we start messing with it now, it will be stuck to the pan. Because of that hot heat, it's going to grab the tissue, but in a couple minutes what you're going to get is called a release, where you form a crust and then it actually releases from the pan real smoothly. While that's cooking, I do have my oven heated up. It's set to 375. So after about 2-3 minutes, then we'll be able to flip our steak, give it another 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll go into the oven. Our 3 minutes is just about up. So now we can kind of check. See how it just popped right up? And we got that nice brown sear going on. Again, we flip it over. Make sure it's in contact with our pan. And we're going to set our timer for 3 minutes. Our timer is just about up now again, so we're going to check our steak. Again, we've got a beautiful sear going on. So we're going to turn off that heat. This whole thing is made out of stainless steel, so the entire thing will go right into the oven. So we've killed the heat, and now we're just going to put it in there. This is going to stay in the oven for roughly 10 minutes. With our steak in the oven, now we're going to shift our attention to our asparagus. So we're going to put this pan on medium-high heat. Again, we're looking to saute. We're looking to get some brown, some color, some caramelization on our asparagus. So we're going to let that heat up. Now that our pan is heated up enough, we're going to go ahead and get our asparagus into the pan. Now this whole thing just be poured in. Give the asparagus a little toss. Boom. So what we're going to do is we're going to get it nice and spread out in the pan, and then we're just going to allow this to kind of work and do its thing. When we're sauteing and we're looking for caramelization, if we stir it too much, we're not going to get that effect. So make sure you're attending to it, but don't be too busy with it. Let it do its thing. It wants to chill out. It wants to cook and get delicious. Quick little toss. Now what we're shooting for with our asparagus is tender crisp. Just tender enough that we can pierce it with a fork, but still has its texture and its beautiful bite that asparagus has. To test this doneness, you're just going to want to have a fork by hand. And practice or test stabbing some of the asparagus. Our asparagus is done. And we killed the heat. Now we can take this off. We're going to take it out of the pan. That way it doesn't continue to cook. And have it ready to go once our steaks come out. Okay, our steak's done, so let's pull it out. We're going to bring it over to the counter. Beautiful. Now, the important part of making a really nice piece of meat is once it's done cooking, allowing it to rest. Now that it is done cooking, what we're going to do is we're going to take it out of the pan. And we're going to bring it over to our cutting board. Move our pan out of the way. And we're just going to let it sit. Now, as this is sitting, we can help keep some of the warmth in. You can take a piece of aluminum foil and just set it over the top loosely, just to help retain some of that heat. But what we want to do is let it sit, let it rest. What this is going to do is allow the juices within the meat to redistribute. It's going to allow the muscles to kind of relax, because after being in that heat, they're kind of tight right now. And if we were just to dive into it with a knife, all of the juices inside the steak would run out, and you'd end up with a dry piece of meat that otherwise would have been beautifully juicy and delicious. So 5 minutes, 10 minutes, depending on the thickness of your meat, give it that time, you won't be disappointed. Now everything is ready to go. Our meat's been resting, so let's open it up. You can see, hopefully you can see there's still steam coming off. Plenty of heat still in the meat. Now we're going to prepare this for presentation. Now, with serving a steak like this, oftentimes it's real nice just to place this on the plate and allow a customer, whoever's eating it, to cut the meat and enjoy that whole process. But for these purposes, for working on plating and presentation, we're going to scale it down just a little bit. So we're going to take the meat off of the bone, and then we're going to slice the steaks. This is going to allow us to control the type of textures and experiences that our customer, whoever it is that's enjoying our food, is having. Okay. So I'm going to grab a fork quick. Now, like I said, we want to make sure that we're cutting this in the proper way. Okay, so first off, we're going to take this off the bone. Pull away and see the doneness of our steak. Go on the other side. Removing the meat from the bone, and you can save that for later. From here, what we want to do is identify the grain of our steak. So if you kind of pull your knife along the meat, you can start to kind of pull apart some of those grains. And so my grain's running this way. So I'm going to slice my steak this way, across that grain. That's going to give us smaller muscle fibers and a much more tender eating experience. Okay, so here I'm going to go through, take off the first amount. I'm going to cut this down in half just because it's a really long piece of meat. Set that to the side. So now we have it sliced down. Whoever is enjoying this will still be able to cut it down into smaller pieces, but the work's kind of done. We'll go ahead and get a couple pieces of the tenderloin cut down for that as well. Now let's move to plating. To start our plating, we're going to take a few strips of our steak and lay them out on our plate. A few strips of the tenderloin. In terms of appearance and aesthetics, we generally want to try to work up rather than out on our plate. That's going to give it a little better look, make it a little bit nicer. So from here, what we're going to do is take some of our asparagus, and we're just going to go ahead and set it right on top of our steak. Okay. With having the long lines of both the steak and the asparagus crossed like this, we have a nice contrast of lines. So from a design standpoint, this is very appealing and aesthetic. Now we can go back to that mushroom sauce that we spent so much time on before. Give it a quick stir in the pan. Then I'm going to grab a spoon. And we're not going to be real crazy with the sauce, but just a nice spooning of mushrooms and the gravy across both the asparagus and the steak. And there you have it. Seared steak with sauteed asparagus and a mushroom sauce. Real simple, real delicious once you know all the pieces that go into it. So let's go ahead and give it a quick taste. And this is definitely a meal where you want a little bit of everything in one bite. Delicate but hearty at the same time. The steak has a lot of really nice flavor, simply dressed with salt and pepper, cooked really well, still nice and tender, melts in the mouth. The natural flavors of the asparagus help to complement that with the mushroom sauce, all to wrap it up. This has been here with this. This has been Cooking with Carper.